The mud splattered across her skirts like dark paint thrown by an angry artist, and Beatrice Harper knew this was the moment her marriage finally shattered beyond all repair. It was August 1877 in Wasco, California, a town barely clinging to existence in the San Joaquin Valley where the earth baked hard under relentless sun, and tempers flared hotter than the afternoon heat. Beatrice stood in the middle of Main Street, her basket of groceries scattered across the dirt road, watching her husband Daniel hurl her belongings one by one into the thick mud left behind by yesterday's rare summer storm. A jar of preserves, her mother's Bible, the fabric she had saved 3 months to purchase. Each item landed with a sickening splat that made her flinch. "You think you can embarrass me?" Daniel's face was crimson, his voice carrying to every window and doorway along the street. "Speaking to the banker like you have any say in our finances?" Beatrice's hands trembled at her sides. She had only asked Mr. Peterson about the interest rates on their loan, trying to understand why they could barely afford food when Daniel claimed to be working so hard. That simple question had somehow transformed into this public humiliation, her husband's rage erupting the moment they stepped outside the bank. "Daniel, please," she said quietly, aware of the eyes watching from behind curtains and half-open doors. "Let me just pick these up and we can go home." "Pick them up?" He laughed, harsh and bitter. "You want to grovel in the mud like the worthless thing you are? Go ahead then. Crawl for it." He grabbed the last items from her basket, her grandmother's silver hairbrush and a small sack of sugar, and threw them hard into the deepest puddle. The sugar sack split open, white crystals dissolving instantly into the brown water. Beatrice felt something crack inside her chest, but she refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of the whole town. She had endured 2 years of Daniel's escalating cruelty, his drinking, his accusations that she was never good enough. She had made excuses for the bruises, blamed herself for his anger, convinced herself that the sweet boy she had married at 19 still existed somewhere beneath the bitter man he had become. She knelt in the street, her dove-gray skirts immediately soaking up the muddy water, and reached for the Bible. Her fingers closed around the leather cover, just as Daniel's boot came down hard on her wrist. "I said crawl!" The pain shot up her arm, and she gasped, trying to pull away, but he pressed harder. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks, not from the physical hurt, but from the humiliation, the unfairness, the terrible realization that this was her life, and might always be her life unless she found the courage to change it. "That is enough." The voice was low and steady, carrying a quiet authority that cut through Daniel's rage like a knife through butter. Beatrice looked up through her tears to see a tall figure stepping into the street, his boots moving with careful purpose through the mud. The cowboy was perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that fell to his collar beneath a weather-beaten hat. He wore simple working clothes, a blue shirt and leather vest, denim pants tucked into worn boots. His face was angular and serious, his gray eyes fixed on Daniel with an intensity that made Beatrice's husband finally remove his boot from her wrist. "This is none of your concern, stranger," Daniel said, puffing out his chest. "I am disciplining my wife. By crushing her bones?" The cowboy moved closer, his hand resting casually on his hip, near where a revolver hung in a simple holster. "I have seen men treat their horses better." Daniel's face flushed darker. "Who the hell do you think you are?" "Name is Fletcher Logan. I am new to town, just hired on at the Morrison Ranch." He did not look at Daniel as he spoke, instead moving to Beatrice's side and extending his hand to her. "Madam, let me help you up." Beatrice hesitated, knowing that accepting his help would only fuel Daniel's rage, but her wrists throbbed and her knees ached from kneeling in the mud. She placed her hand in Fletcher's, surprised by the gentleness of his grip, as he pulled her to her feet with easy strength. "Thank you," she whispered. Fletcher released her hand and then did something that stunned her. He knelt in the mud himself and began gathering her scattered belongings, carefully wiping each item on his own shirt, before placing them back in her basket. He retrieved the Bible, the preserves, the fabric now stained beyond saving, but folded it anyway. He picked up the silver hairbrush and cleaned it with such care that Beatrice felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "You are making a mistake, cowboy," Daniel said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "That is my wife, and these are my possessions." Fletcher stood, holding the basket full of muddy items. Then, you should have treated them with respect. He turned to Beatrice, his gray eyes softening just slightly. Madam, is there somewhere safe I can escort you? Family? Friends? Beatrice opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Safe? She barely remembered what that word meant. Her parents had died 3 years ago from fever, and Daniel had systematically isolated her from the few friends she had made in Wasco. She had nowhere to go, no money of her own, no prospects beyond the small house at the edge of town, where Daniel's anger seemed to grow larger every day. She is coming home with me, Daniel snapped, reaching for Beatrice's arm. Fletcher moved between them so quickly it seemed almost like a dance step, his body blocking Daniel's access to Beatrice without any overt threat. Is that where you want to go, madam? The question hung in the air between them. Beatrice could feel the weight of it, the choice being offered. Every fiber of her upbringing screamed that she should go home with her husband, that marriage was sacred, that her duty was to submit and obey. But her wrist still ached from his boot, and she could not forget the satisfaction she had seen in his eyes when he threw her grandmother's brush into the mud. She started, her voice barely audible. I do not know. Daniel laughed, the sound ugly. She is confused. The sun has gotten to her. Come on, Beatrice, stop this nonsense and let us go home. The lady said she does not know, Fletcher said calmly. That means she is not going anywhere with you right now. He glanced at Beatrice. The boarding house up the street, Mrs. Chen runs it. She is a good woman. I can take you there while you figure things out. You are going to regret this interference, Daniel hissed. Both of you. This town is not big enough for you to hide from me, stranger. Fletcher's expression did not change, but something hardened in his eyes. That sounds like a threat. Sheriff might be interested to hear about that, along with how you publicly assaulted your wife in the street. I am sure all these witnesses would be happy to share what they saw. For the first time since the confrontation began, uncertainty flickered across Daniel's face. He looked around at the buildings lining the street, seeming to notice for the first time how many people had emerged to watch. Mrs. Patterson stood in her shop doorway. Old Mr. Gaines had stopped his wagon mid-street. Even Sheriff Coleman had appeared on the porch of his office, thumbs hooked in his belt as he surveyed the scene with narrowed eyes. Daniel's jaw clenched. This is not over, Beatrice. You are my wife. You took vows. And you took the same vows, Fletcher said quietly. To love and cherish. Does not look much like cherishing to me. Daniel spat into the mud, gave them both a look of pure hatred, and stalked away toward the saloon at the end of the street. Beatrice watched him go, her entire body starting to shake now that the immediate danger had passed. Easy now, Fletcher said, his voice gentle. Let me get you to the boarding house. Can you walk? I think so. But when she tried to take a step, her knees buckled. Whether from kneeling so long in the mud or from the shock of what had just happened, she could not tell. Fletcher caught her before she fell, one arm supporting her back. Forgive me, madam, but I think it is better if I carry you. You are in shock, and that mud has made your skirts heavy. The boarding house is just up the street. Beatrice knew she should protest, knew that being carried through town by a strange man would cause even more scandal than what had already transpired, but she found she did not care anymore. Her carefully maintained reputation, her standing as a respectable married woman, what good had any of it done her? All right, she whispered. Fletcher shifted the basket to one arm, and then, with surprising care, lifted her into his arms as though she weighed nothing. Beatrice had to put her arm around his shoulders to steady herself, acutely aware of the solid strength of his body, the clean scent of soap and leather and sun-warmed cotton. Daniel never held her like this, as if she was something precious rather than a burden. The walk to Mrs. Chen's boarding house lasted perhaps 3 minutes, but Beatrice felt as though she existed in a strange bubble where time moved differently. She was aware of people staring, of whispered conversations, but Fletcher kept his eyes forward, his expression calm and determined. When they reached the boarding house, a neat 2-story building with a wide porch and cheerful yellow curtains, he mounted the steps carefully and knocked on the door. Mrs. Chen herself answered, a small woman with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her dark eyes took in the scene with the quick assessment of someone who had seen many things in her 60-some years, living first through the hardships of coming to California during the gold rush, and now running one of the most respectable establishments in Wasco. Mr. Logan, she said in her precise, slightly accented English. What has happened? This is Mrs. Harper. She needs a safe place to stay and time to think. Her husband was abusing her in the street. I will pay for her room. Mrs. Chen's expression hardened. I have heard of Daniel Harper, a man who drinks too much and thinks too highly of himself. She stepped back, opening the door wider. Bring her to the parlor. No payment is needed. We women must help each other. Fletcher carried Beatrice inside to a comfortable parlor with worn but clean furniture. He set her down gently on a settee near the window, then placed her basket on the floor beside her. For a moment he stood there, his hat in his hands, looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. Will you be all right, madam? He asked. Beatrice looked up at him, this stranger who had appeared like an avenging angel in her darkest moment. I do not know, she admitted, but I am safer here than I was 10 minutes ago, and I have you to thank for that. Any decent person would have done the same. But they did not, she said softly. Everyone was watching. No one else stepped in. You did. A faint color rose in his cheeks and he looked away, uncomfortable with her gratitude. I should let you rest. Mrs. Chen will take good care of you. He settled his hat back on his head. If you need anything, I am staying in the room at the back of the Morrison Ranch barn. It is not much, but you can send word there if you need help. Wait, Beatrice said as he turned to leave. I do not even know how to thank you properly. You risk Daniel's anger, possibly even violence. For a stranger? Fletcher paused at the parlor doorway. My mother used to say that character is what you do when no one is watching and when everyone is watching. I could not stand by and watch a man hurt a woman, no matter the consequences. He tipped his hat to her. Rest well, Mrs. Harper. Then he was gone, his boots echoing on the porch steps, leaving Beatrice sitting in the quiet parlor with her muddy skirts and her basket of salvage belongings, and a strange ache in her chest that felt something like hope. Mrs. Chen returned with a basin of warm water, clean cloths, and a cup of chamomile tea. Come, we will get you cleaned up and into some dry clothes. I have a dress that should fit you well enough. Then you will tell me everything, and we will decide what to do. Over the next hour, as Beatrice washed the mud from her skin and changed into Mrs. Chen's spare dress, a simple brown calico that was softer and better made than anything Daniel had bought her in 2 years, she found herself telling the story. Not just today's humiliation, but all of it. The gradual change in Daniel after their wedding, how his drinking increased and his temper shortened. The first time he had hit her, apologizing so profusely afterward that she convinced herself it would never happen again. The way he controlled every penny, every decision, every aspect of her life until she felt like a prisoner in her own home. Mrs. Chen listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of sympathy. When Beatrice finished, her voice hoarse from talking, the older woman poured them both more tea and sat back in her chair. You know you cannot go back to him, she said simply. I am his wife. The law is written by men who do not have to live with men's fists, Mrs. Chen interrupted. I know what the law says. I also know what is right. You stay here as long as you need. If Daniel comes looking for you, I have ways of discouraging him. My late husband may be gone these 10 years, but his shotgun still works perfectly well. Despite everything, Beatrice felt a smile tug at her lips. You are very kind. I am practical. Good women are too hard to come by in this town. We cannot afford to let the bad men destroy them. Mrs. Chen stood, smoothing her apron. Now you rest. There is a room upstairs, second door on the right. It has a lock on the inside. Use it. Tomorrow we will think about the future. Tonight, you are safe. Beatrice climbed the stairs on shaking legs, found the room exactly as Mrs. Chen described, and locked the door behind her. The room was small but immaculately clean, with a brass bed covered in a colorful quilt, a simple dresser, and a window overlooking the street. She could see the mountains in the distance, purple shadows against the darkening sky. She sat on the bed, and finally, in the privacy of that small room, she let herself cry. She cried for the girl she had been at 19, full of dreams and hope. She cried for the 2 years of her life lost to a man who saw her as property rather than a person. She cried for her mother's Bible lying in the mud and her father's voice saying how much he liked Daniel when they first met. She cried until no more tears would come, and then she lay down on the quilt and fell into an exhausted sleep. She dreamed of gray eyes and gentle hands, of someone treating her grandmother's brush like it mattered, and she woke in the darkness with her heart pounding, and a feeling she had not experienced in a very long time: freedom. The next morning arrived with the harsh light of California summer, and with it came the questions Beatrice had been too overwhelmed to consider the night before. What would she do now? Where would she go? She had no money, no family, limited skills beyond keeping house and cooking. The thought of divorcing Daniel was scandalous and difficult, requiring proof of abuse or abandonment that she would have to present in court. Even if she succeeded, divorced women were viewed with suspicion and pity, their prospects for respectable work or remarriage severely limited. Mrs. Chen knocked on her door just after dawn, bringing a tray with breakfast: eggs, toast, jam, and coffee. "Eat," she commanded. "You look like a strong wind could blow you over." Beatrice realized she had not eaten since noon the previous day. She had been too nervous about talking to the banker to have much appetite, and after the confrontation with Daniel, food had been the last thing on her mind. Now hunger hit her like a wave, and she ate quickly, barely tasting the food in her haste. "Good," Mrs. Chen said approvingly. "Now, I have been thinking about your situation. I can offer you work here at the boarding house if you want it, cooking, cleaning, helping with the guests. It is not glamorous and the pay is modest, but it comes with room and board. You would be safe here." Beatrice set down her coffee cup, overwhelmed by the generosity. "Mrs. Chen, I could not possibly—" "You can and you will, if you want it. I am not offering charity. I genuinely need the help. I am getting older, and the work is getting harder. Having another woman here would be good for business too. Some of the ranch hands who stay here get rowdy. They behave better when there are ladies present. But Daniel Harper has no legal right to harass my business or my employees. If he tries, Sheriff Coleman will have words with him. The sheriff and I go back many years. He owes me favors." Beatrice considered this. The idea of having work, of earning her own money, of being useful and independent was so appealing, it almost frightened her. "I accept," she said, before she could second-guess herself. "Thank you. I will work as hard as I can." Mrs. Chen smiled, the expression transforming her stern face into something almost mischievous. "I know you will. I am an excellent judge of character. Now finish your breakfast, and then you can start by helping me prepare the noon meal. We have 6 guests currently, including your rescuer, Mr. Logan." Beatrice's hand stilled on her coffee cup. "He is staying here?" "He has been here 3 days, since he arrived in town to work for the Morrison Ranch. He is polite, quiet, and pays on time. The perfect guest." Mrs. Chen paused at the doorway. "He asked about you this morning, when he came down for breakfast. Wanted to know if you were all right. I told him you were safe and resting. He seemed relieved." After Mrs. Chen left, Beatrice sat with her cooling coffee and tried to sort through the confusing tangle of emotions in her chest. She was grateful to Fletcher Logan, of course, enormously grateful. But there was something else too, something she barely dared acknowledge. The memory of being held carefully in his arms, the way he had cleaned her grandmother's brush with such gentleness, the quiet authority in his voice when he faced down Daniel. She shook her head firmly. She had just escaped one marriage. The last thing she needed was to develop romantic notions about a cowboy she barely knew. Fletcher had helped her because he was a good man, nothing more. She needed to focus on building a new life for herself, on becoming independent and strong. Still, when she went downstairs an hour later to help Mrs. Chen in the kitchen, she found herself glancing toward the front door more often than necessary, wondering if she might catch a glimpse of him. The work was hard but satisfying. Mrs. Chen ran her boarding house with military precision, and Beatrice threw herself into the routines with determination. She learned where everything was kept, how Mrs. Chen liked things done, the preferences of the regular guests. She helped prepare a midday meal of roasted chicken, potatoes, and fresh vegetables from Mrs. Chen's garden. The kitchen grew hot from the stove, but Beatrice did not mind. The heat felt honest, earned, unlike the suffocating atmosphere of Daniel's house. The guests arrived for the meal at noon, filing into the dining room with the hearty appetites of working men. Most were ranch hands or men passing through on their way to other towns. They nodded politely to Beatrice as she helped Mrs. Chen serve the food, some looking curious about the new woman helping out, but none were disrespectful. Fletcher Logan was the last to arrive. He had clearly been working all morning, his shirt dusty and his face showing the flush of exertion and sun. When he saw Beatrice carrying a platter of chicken, he stopped in the doorway for just a moment, surprise flickering across his features. "Mrs. Harper," he said, removing his hat, "it is good to see you looking better." "Thank you, Mr. Logan. I am feeling much better." She was acutely aware of how she must look in her borrowed dress, her hair pinned back simply, but his expression held only respect and perhaps a hint of approval. "You are working here now?" "Mrs. Chen has been kind enough to offer me employment." "That is good. That is very good." He seemed like he wanted to say more, but glanced around at the other men watching with interest. "Well, that chicken smells delicious. Mrs. Chen's cooking is already legendary, and if you had a hand in it, I am sure it will be even better." He took his seat at the far end of the table, and the meal proceeded with the usual sounds of hungry men eating and making light conversation. Beatrice stayed busy bringing more food, refilling coffee cups, clearing empty plates. She was glad for the activity because it gave her an excuse not to think too hard about how her heart had jumped when Fletcher walked into the room. After the meal, as the guests returned to their work, Fletcher approached her in the kitchen where she was washing dishes. Mrs. Chen had gone upstairs to tend to something, leaving them alone for a moment. "Mrs. Harper, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I wanted to make sure you truly are all right. What happened yesterday was, well, it was terrible. No woman should be treated that way." Beatrice kept her hands in the dishwater, watching the soap bubbles swirl. "I am managing, thank you. Mrs. Chen has been wonderful, and I cannot thank you enough for what you did. You saved me from a very bad situation. I only did what anyone should do, but others did not do it. You did." She turned to face him, drying her hands on her apron. "Mr. Logan, I want you to know that I am not some helpless creature who needs rescuing. I am going to build a life for myself here, independent of my husband. I will not be a burden to anyone." His gray eyes studied her face, and she saw respect there. "I never thought you were helpless, madam. Scared, yes. Hurt, certainly. But I saw something in your eyes yesterday, even when you were kneeling in that mud. Strength, determination. You just needed someone to give you a chance to use it." The words settled into her chest like something warm and nourishing. Daniel had spent 2 years telling her she was useless, stupid, worthless. In one short conversation, this cowboy had seen more clearly who she really was. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you know. If you ever need anything, truly anything, you just ask. I mean that." He settled his hat back on his head. "Now I should get back to the ranch. Mr. Morrison wants me to help with the new herd he just bought, but I will be back for supper." "I will make sure there is plenty," Beatrice said, surprised by how much she meant it. The days that followed fell into a pattern that was both strange and comforting. Beatrice rose early to help Mrs. Chen with breakfast, worked through the day cleaning rooms and preparing meals, and fell into bed exhausted each night. The work was harder than anything Daniel had let her do, ironically, since he had preferred she stay idle at home while he controlled everything. But this work felt purposeful. She was earning her keep, building skills, proving to herself that she could survive on her own. Daniel came to the boarding house on the 3rd day. Beatrice was upstairs changing linens when she heard his voice demanding to see his wife. Mrs. Chen's calm refusal carried up the stairs, followed by Daniel's raised voice threatening legal action. Beatrice stood frozen in the guest room, her hands clutching the sheets she had been folding, her heart racing with fear and anger. Then she heard Sheriff Coleman's voice, quiet but firm. Mrs. Chen must have sent someone for him. Beatrice moved to the top of the stairs, staying out of sight, and listened. "You need to leave, Daniel," the sheriff said. "Mrs. Chen has the right to refuse anyone entry to her establishment. That is my wife in there. I have a legal right to speak with her. You have no right to harass business owners or disturb the peace. I have had 3 separate reports about your behavior in the street earlier this week, publicly abusing Mrs. Harper and destroying her property. That is not acceptable conduct. A man has the right to discipline his wife. A man has the right to treat his wife with respect, which you clearly have not done. Now I suggest you leave before I arrest you for disturbing the peace. And Daniel, if I hear about you bothering Mrs. Harper or Mrs. Chen again, I will find other charges to bring. We clear?" There was a long, tense silence, and then Beatrice heard Daniel's footsteps stomping out and the door slamming. She sagged against the wall in relief. "Mrs.?" Chen called up the stairs. "He is gone, dear. You can breathe now." Beatrice came down slowly, finding Mrs. Chen and Sheriff Coleman in the parlor. The sheriff was a stocky man in his 50s with a weathered face and kind eyes. He nodded to her respectfully. "Mrs. Harper, I am sorry you have had to deal with this. I want you to know that you have the law's protection. If Daniel bothers you again, you come straight to me." "Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate that." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been weighing on her. "What are my options? Legally, I mean. Can I divorce him?" Sheriff Coleman sighed. "That is complicated. California law does allow for divorce on the grounds of extreme cruelty, but you would need to prove it in court. Witnesses, evidence. It can be a long process and not always successful. Another option is a legal separation, which would allow you to live apart and protect any assets or income you have. I have no assets. Everything belongs to Daniel. Well, anything you earn from this point forward could be protected under a separation agreement. I would recommend you speak with a lawyer. There is a fellow in Bakersfield, about 25 miles south, who handles these cases. Name is Michael Sullivan. Good man, fair prices." He pulled a small notebook from his pocket and wrote down the information. "I can arrange for transportation if you want to consult with him." Beatrice took the paper with trembling hands. The idea of taking legal action against Daniel, of standing up in court and recounting his abuse, was terrifying. But the alternative was going back to him, and that was no longer something she could consider. "Thank you," she said. "I will think about it." Over the next week, Beatrice thought about little else. She threw herself into her work, saving every penny Mrs. Chen paid her. But at night she lay awake, weighing her options. A divorce would give her complete freedom, but would also mark her as a scandal in society. A legal separation would be less dramatic, but might leave her in legal limbo, still married but apart. Doing nothing meant living in constant fear that Daniel would force her to return. Fletcher had become a quiet but steady presence in her life. They did not speak privately often, but she was aware of him in the way she was aware of the sun moving across the sky. Present, constant, warming. He always thanked her for meals. He helped carry heavy things without being asked. Once, when one of the other ranch hands made a comment about Daniel that was meant to be sympathetic but came out insulting to Beatrice, Fletcher shut him down with a look that could have frozen whiskey. It was late September, nearly a month after the incident in the street, when everything changed again. Beatrice was in the kitchen garden behind the boarding house, harvesting the last of the summer vegetables before the cooling weather killed them off. It was early evening, the sun hanging low and golden, painting everything in shades of amber. She was thinking about nothing in particular, just enjoying the quiet and the satisfaction of filling her basket with tomatoes and squash. She did not hear Daniel approach until he was already there, grabbing her arm and spinning her around. The basket fell, vegetables scattering across the ground. "You think you can hide from me?" His breath reeked of whiskey. "You think you can shame me in front of this whole town and there would not be consequences?" Beatrice tried to pull away, but his grip was iron. "Let me go, Daniel," the sheriff said. "I do not care what that fool sheriff said. You are my wife. You are coming home with me right now, and then we are going to have a long conversation about obedience." Fear spiked through her, but beneath it was something new. Fury, pure, righteous anger. She had spent a month building a new life, proving she could survive without him, and he thought he could just drag her back like she was a runaway dog. "No," she said clearly. "I am not going anywhere with you." Daniel's eyes widened in shock, and then his free hand came up. Beatrice saw the blow coming and tried to duck, but his grip on her arm kept her in place. She closed her eyes, bracing for the impact. It never came. She opened her eyes to find Fletcher standing there, his hand wrapped around Daniel's wrist, stopping the blow mid-swing. Fletcher must have come around the corner of the house, perhaps returning from the ranch. His expression was colder than she had ever seen it. "I believe the lady said no," Fletcher said, his voice deadly quiet. Daniel tried to jerk his arm free but could not break Fletcher's grip. "This is none of your concern, Cowboy. This is between me and my wife." "That stopped being true the moment you raised your hand to her." Fletcher released Daniel's wrist and moved between him and Beatrice. "Leave, now." "Or what? You will shoot me? Make yourself a murderer over a worthless woman? I will defend someone who cannot defend herself, but I do not need a gun for that." Fletcher's stance shifted slightly, balanced and ready. "I grew up with 4 older brothers on a ranch in Montana. We settled our differences with our fists. I got very good at it. You want to test that? You go right ahead." Beatrice could see the calculation in Daniel's eyes, weighing his chances. Fletcher was younger, taller, and sober. Daniel was drunk and soft, from months of doing more drinking than working. "This is not over," Daniel spat. "She is still my wife. The law is on my side. The law says you cannot assault people, even your wife. The law says harassment is a crime. You keep pushing, and you will find yourself in a cell." Fletcher did not move, his body still blocking Daniel's path to Beatrice. "Now get out of here before I lose my patience." Daniel glared at them both, and then stumbled away, muttering threats and curses. Fletcher stood perfectly still until Daniel disappeared around the corner of the building, and only then did he turn to Beatrice. "Are you hurt? Did he—" "I am fine. You stopped him." Her voice shook despite her best efforts to steady it. "You keep saving me. I am starting to feel like a character in a dime novel." Fletcher's stern expression softened into something almost like a smile. "You were handling yourself pretty well. I just provided backup. I said no to him. I have never done that before." She realized she was shaking, not from fear but from the adrenaline of confrontation. "I always just tried to placate him, to avoid making him angrier, but this time I just refused." "That took courage," Fletcher said quietly. "More courage than anything I did." They stood there in the garden as the evening light deepened around them, and Beatrice felt something shift in the air between them. She had been so focused on rebuilding her life, on being independent and strong, that she had not let herself acknowledge what was growing in her heart. But standing here with Fletcher, her rescuer and protector and friend, she could not deny it any longer. She was falling in love with him. The realization should have terrified her. She was technically still married, legally bound to another man. Getting involved with Fletcher would be scandalous, potentially ruinous for both of them. But when she looked at his face, at the concern in his gray eyes, and the way he had placed himself between her and danger without hesitation, she felt no fear, only a deep, settling certainty. "Fletcher," she said, using his first name for the first time, "would you take a walk with me? I think I need some air, and I would feel safer with company." "Of course." He offered his arm, and she took it, aware of the solid strength beneath the fabric of his shirt. They walked away from the boarding house, toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land and the mountains stood purple against the darkening sky. They did not speak at first, just walked together in comfortable silence. Beatrice tried to organize her thoughts, to find the right words for what she wanted to say. Finally, as they stood looking out over the valley, she spoke. "I am going to divorce him. I have decided. I do not care how long it takes or how difficult it is. I cannot live in fear anymore, wondering when he will show up, what he will do. I need to be completely free of him." Fletcher nodded slowly. "That is a brave decision. I will support you however I can." "Why?" The question came out more bluntly than she intended. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me? You barely know me. I am married to another man. Helping me could cause you all kinds of trouble. So, why do you keep doing it?" He was quiet for a long moment, his profile sharp against the twilight. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, as though he was weighing each word. "When I saw you kneeling in that street, your husband's boot on your wrist and tears on your face, something broke open inside me. I have seen hard things in my life, Beatrice. I have lost people I loved. I have made mistakes and paid for them, but I have never been able to walk past someone suffering when I had the power to help. And you—" He paused, then continued. "You were not just suffering, you were surviving. There is a difference. Even at your lowest point, there was this light in you that refused to go out. I could see it, and I knew you were worth fighting for." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "I think you are the kindest man I have ever met. I am just a cowboy who tries to do right when he can." "No." She turned to face him fully. "You are more than that. You see people. You treat them with dignity. You stood up for me when no one else would. Not because you wanted anything in return, but because it was the right thing to do." She took a shaky breath. "And I need you to know that I am grateful for you in ways I do not have words for." Fletcher looked down at her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. It was tenderness and longing and careful restraint all mixed together. "Beatrice," he said softly, "I want you to be free, free from fear, free from him, free to build whatever life you want. And when you are, if you might consider. He stopped, shook his head. I am saying this all wrong. She reached up and touched his face, her palm against his cheek. He went very still. You are saying it perfectly, she whispered, but I cannot ask you to wait for me. I do not know how long this will take. Months, maybe longer. You should not have to put your life on hold for a woman who is still legally married to someone else. Fletcher covered her hand with his, holding it against his face. I have been waiting my whole life for someone like you. I can wait a little longer. The kiss happened naturally, inevitably, like flowers blooming or seasons changing. His lips were gentle on hers, asking rather than demanding, and Beatrice felt something in her chest unfurl like wings. She had been kissed before, of course, by Daniel during their courtship and early marriage. But those kisses had always felt like something Daniel was taking from her. This kiss felt like Fletcher was giving her something precious. Respect, affection, promise. When they broke apart, both slightly breathless, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. I should not have done that. You are still married and I am glad you did, Beatrice said firmly. Daniel forfeited any claim to my loyalty when he threw my things in the mud and tried to break me. I am not truly his wife anymore, even if the law says different. And you, Fletcher Logan, you make me feel like a person again, like I matter. Like I am worth something. You are worth everything, he said fiercely. Do not ever doubt that. They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, and though they said nothing more, Beatrice felt as though a new chapter of her life had begun. She was still afraid of what lay ahead, still uncertain about the legal battles and social judgment she would face. But she was not alone anymore. She had Mrs. Chen's support, the sheriff's protection, and Fletcher's affection. She had herself, stronger and braver than she had ever been. That night, lying in her small room, she made plans. Tomorrow she would ask Mrs. Chen about getting to Bakersfield to see the lawyer. She would start the divorce proceedings, whatever they required. She would build a future where she answered to no one but herself. And if that future had room for a kind cowboy with gray eyes and gentle hands, well, that would be more than she ever dreamed possible. The journey to Bakersfield took place a week later. Mrs. Chen arranged for a friend who ran freight between towns to give Beatrice a ride in his wagon. Fletcher asked for the day off from his work at the Morrison Ranch and accompanied her, saying he would not let her make such a trip alone. The lawyer, Michael Sullivan, was a portly man in his 40s with shrewd eyes and a surprisingly gentle manner. He listened to Beatrice's story without interruption, occasionally making notes. And when she finished, he sat back in his chair and considered. You have grounds for divorce on the basis of extreme cruelty, he said finally. The public nature of the abuse, combined with witness testimony from the street incident and the subsequent harassment, should be sufficient. However, I will be honest with you, Mrs. Harper. These cases can take time. 6 months to a year is typical. During that time, your husband may contest the divorce, which could extend the process further. You will need to appear in court and testify to the abuse. It will not be pleasant. I understand, Beatrice said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I want to proceed. There is one other thing to consider. California law requires that you prove residency in the county where you file. You have been in Kern County for how long? 2 years. My husband and I moved to Wasco 2 years ago. Good. That satisfies the residency requirement. I will draw up the initial petition. My fee is $50 total, payable over time if needed. We will file within the month and then wait for a court date. He looked at her seriously. Mrs. Harper, once we file this, there is no going back. Your husband will be notified. His reaction may be difficult. I want to make sure you are prepared for that and have support in place. I have support, Beatrice said, glancing at Fletcher who sat beside her. I am ready to do this. On the ride back to Wasco, Beatrice felt lighter than she had in months, despite knowing the hard part was still ahead. Fletcher was quiet beside her, his presence steady and comforting as the wagon rattled over the rough road. Thank you for coming with me, she said. I do not think I could have done that alone. You could have, Fletcher said, but I am glad you did not have to. He hesitated, then added, Beatrice, you know that once the divorce is filed, Daniel will likely get worse before he gets better. He will see it as a challenge to his authority, an insult to his pride. You need to be very careful. I know. Mrs. Chen has promised I can stay at the boarding house as long as needed, and Sheriff Coleman said he would keep an eye on things. I will too. I am not letting him hurt you again. The intensity in his voice made her turn to look at him. Fletcher, I do not want you to risk yourself for me. You have already done so much. If Daniel comes after you, then I will handle it. Beatrice, I meant what I said in the garden. You matter to me, more than I probably should admit while you are still married. But there it is. I will not stand by and let him hurt you, no matter the risk. She reached over and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. You are a good man, Fletcher Logan. The best man I have ever known. He squeezed her hand gently, and they rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the valley and turn the sky into ribbons of orange and pink and gold. The divorce petition was filed in mid-October, and as predicted, Daniel's reaction was explosive. He showed up at the boarding house drunk and raging, pounding on the door and shouting for Beatrice to come out. Sheriff Coleman arrested him for disturbing the peace and public intoxication, and Daniel spent 2 nights in jail. When he was released, he went to the saloon and told anyone who would listen that his wife was a faithless whore and the cowboy helping her was going to pay. Fletcher heard about the threats but did not seem concerned. Let him talk, he said when Beatrice expressed worry. Words are just air. If he tries anything more than talk, he will regret it. But Daniel did try more than talk. One evening in late October, as Fletcher was riding back to town from the Morrison Ranch, someone shot at him from a cluster of rocks near the road. The bullet missed, but Fletcher's horse spooked and threw him. He hit the ground hard, the wind knocked from his lungs, and by the time he recovered enough to draw his own gun, whoever had shot at him was gone. Sheriff Coleman investigated but could not prove Daniel was responsible, though everyone had their suspicions. Fletcher was lucky, escaping with nothing worse than bruises, but the incident terrified Beatrice. The idea that Daniel might kill Fletcher because of her was unbearable. You should leave town, she told Fletcher that night as they sat in Mrs. Chen's parlor, speaking in low voices so as not to disturb the other guests. Go back to Montana or somewhere else. Anywhere but here. I will not let you die because you were kind enough to help me. Fletcher looked at her like she had suggested he sprout wings and fly. I am not leaving you. Fletcher, he tried to kill you. Maybe, probably, but I am not running away just because some coward took a shot at me from hiding. His jaw was set in a stubborn line she was beginning to recognize. Beatrice, do you really think I could ride away knowing you were here alone, dealing with him? What kind of man do you think I am? I think you are a man I love, she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them, and I cannot bear the thought of losing you. The air between them went very still. Fletcher stared at her, something blazing in his eyes. Say that again, he said hoarsely. I love you, Beatrice repeated, her voice stronger now. I know I should not. I know it is too soon, and I am still married and everything is complicated. But I love you, Fletcher. I think I started falling for you the moment you knelt in that mud to gather my things. And now I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Fletcher crossed the room in 3 quick strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. I love you too, he said against her hair. God help me. I have loved you since the moment I saw you refusing to cry in that street. You were the strongest, bravest thing I had ever seen, and I knew right then that you were going to change my life. They held each other for a long moment, and Beatrice felt tears slip down her cheeks. But they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of joy, of finally finding something good and true in a world that had been so cruel for so long. When the divorce is final, Fletcher said, pulling back to look at her face, I am going to ask you to marry me properly. I am going to court you the way you deserve, with flowers and dinners and long conversations. I am going to spend every day showing you what love is supposed to look like. And then, if you will have me, I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt your worth again. Yes, Beatrice said, laughing through her tears. Yes, to all of it. The months that followed were difficult but not unbearable, because Beatrice faced them knowing she was loved. The court date for the divorce hearing was set for March 1878, 6 months after the initial filing. During that time, Daniel continued to make trouble where he could. He spread rumors about Beatrice and Fletcher, calling them adulterers and worse. He tried to get Beatrice fired from the boarding house by claiming she was damaging Mrs. Chen's reputation. He even attempted to have Fletcher arrested for alienation of affection, though Sheriff Coleman refused to pursue such charges without evidence. But the town was slowly turning against Daniel. Too many people had witnessed his abuse, his drinking, his rage. The ranchers who employed him began giving his work to others. The saloon keeper cut him off after he started too many fights. Even the minister at the church, who normally preached about wifely obedience and the sanctity of marriage, gave a sermon about how men who abused their wives were spitting on God's image. Beatrice continued working at the boarding house, saving every penny. Fletcher worked at the Morrison Ranch and began talking to Mr. Morrison about saving up to buy some land of his own, maybe start a small ranch. They stole moments together when they could. Walks in the evening, conversations over meals, sitting on the boarding house porch watching the stars. They were always careful to maintain propriety, never spending time alone behind closed doors, always aware that they were being watched by people eager for scandal. But despite the obstacles, their love grew. Beatrice learned about Fletcher's childhood in Montana, about his parents who had died of influenza when he was 20, about his brothers scattered across the Western territories doing various kinds of work. Fletcher learned about Beatrice's dreams, her love of reading and cooking, her desire to someday have a garden full of flowers just for beauty's sake. "When we have our own place," Fletcher promised, "you can have the biggest garden in California, roses and daisies and whatever else you want." "When we have our own place," Beatrice echoed, loving the sound of those words. The divorce hearing finally arrived in March, on a cool spring morning when the valley was turning green from winter rains. Beatrice wore her best dress, borrowed from Mrs. Chen, and walked into the courthouse with Fletcher on one side and Mrs. Chen on the other. Sheriff Coleman was there to testify, along with several townspeople who had witnessed the street incident. Daniel appeared with a lawyer of his own, a slick-looking man from Bakersfield who argued that Daniel had been a proper husband and Beatrice was simply a difficult, disobedient wife who had been led astray by another man. Beatrice had to sit in the witness chair and recount every humiliation, every blow, every cruel word. It was excruciating, but she kept her voice steady and her gaze level. The judge, a stern man in his 60s, listened to everything with an impassive expression. When the testimony concluded, he took less than 10 minutes to make his decision. "I find sufficient evidence of extreme cruelty to grant the divorce," he announced. "Mrs. Beatrice Harper is hereby freed from her marriage to Mr. Daniel Harper. All property and debts remain with Mr. Harper, as Mrs. Harper brought nothing into the marriage and earned her current income through her own labor after the separation. This court is adjourned." Beatrice sat very still as the words washed over her. Free, she was free. After 2 years of marriage and 6 months of legal battle, she was finally, completely free. Fletcher was at her side immediately, taking her hand. "Congratulations," he said softly, his eyes shining. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she started to laugh, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. "I am free. Fletcher, I am actually free." Outside the courthouse, Mrs. Chen hugged her tightly. "Now you can begin your real life," she said, "the life you were always meant to have." Daniel left Wasco a week later. There was nothing left for him in a town that had turned against him, and with the divorce final, he had no legal claim on Beatrice. Rumor had it he went to San Francisco to try his luck in the city. Beatrice did not care where he went as long as it was far away from her. 3 months after the divorce, on a perfect June evening, with the mountains purple in the distance and the valley air soft with summer warmth, Fletcher Logan asked Beatrice Harper to marry him. They were in Mrs. Chen's garden, the same place where Daniel had once threatened her and Fletcher had defended her. But Fletcher had transformed the space with his efforts, hanging paper lanterns from the trees and scattering flower petals across the ground. It was beautiful and romantic and perfect. He knelt in front of her, a simple gold band in his hand. "Beatrice Harper, you are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. You have been through hell and come out the other side with your spirit unbroken. You make me want to be better than I am. You make me believe in good things. Would you do me the tremendous honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Beatrice said, pulling him to his feet so she could kiss him. "Yes, Fletcher, with all my heart, yes." They were married a month later in a small ceremony at the church, with Mrs. Chen and Sheriff Coleman as witnesses and half the town in attendance. Beatrice wore a dress of ivory lace that Mrs. Chen had helped her make, and she carried wildflowers picked from the meadow. Fletcher wore his best suit and looked so handsome that Beatrice could barely believe this beautiful man was choosing her. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Fletcher kissed her with such tenderness that Beatrice felt tears slip down her cheeks. But they were happy tears, joyful tears, tears that came from finally understanding what marriage was supposed to be. Not ownership or control, but partnership and respect and love. The reception was held at the boarding house, with tables set up in the yard and more food than anyone could eat. People danced to fiddle music and toasted the bride and groom with glasses of lemonade and stronger spirits. Beatrice danced with Fletcher until her feet ached, and she did not care because she had never been so happy in her entire life. As the sun set and the party continued around them, Fletcher pulled her aside to the quiet edge of the garden. "Are you happy?" he asked, as though the answer was not written all over her face. "I did not know it was possible to be this happy," Beatrice said honestly. 6 months ago, I was trapped in a nightmare. Now I am married to the man I love, with a future full of possibilities. It feels like a dream." "It is not a dream," Fletcher promised. "It is real, and it is only the beginning, Beatrice. We have our whole lives ahead of us." Fletcher had been true to his word about saving money, and with the help of Mr. Morrison, who had become something of a mentor to him, he purchased a small parcel of land about 5 miles outside of Wasco. It was not much, just 30 acres with a creek running through it and a small cabin that needed work, but it was theirs. Their home, their future. They spent the summer and fall of 1878 fixing up the cabin and starting their ranch. Fletcher bought a few head of cattle and began building a small herd. Beatrice planted her garden, not just vegetables for eating, but flowers too. Roses and daisies and sunflowers that grew tall and bright. She learned to help with the ranch work, discovering a talent for dealing with the animals and keeping the books organized. They worked hard from dawn until dusk, but it never felt like the oppressive labor of Beatrice's first marriage. This was building something together, creating a life through shared effort and shared dreams. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch, Fletcher's arm around Beatrice's shoulders, and watch the stars emerge over the mountains. "Tell me about Montana," Beatrice would say, and Fletcher would tell stories about his childhood, about winters so cold the snow squeaked when you walked on it, and summers when the prairie grass grew high as a horse's belly. "Tell me about your parents," Fletcher would request, and Beatrice would share memories of her mother teaching her to bake bread and her father reading to her from his favorite books. They were learning each other, weaving their past together into a shared present, building a foundation for their future. In the spring of 1879, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. She told Fletcher one evening after supper, unable to hide her nervous excitement. He stared at her for a long moment, and then he lifted her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Beatrice asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not begin to cover it. Beatrice, you have given me everything, a home, a purpose, and now, a family. I am the luckiest man alive." Their son was born in December 1879, a healthy baby with dark hair and his father's gray eyes. They named him James Fletcher Logan, and he was perfect. Beatrice held him in her arms and marveled at the fact that this tiny person had been created from love, not obligation or fear, but genuine love. Fletcher was a devoted father from the start, getting up with Beatrice for nighttime feedings, walking the floor with James when he cried, staring at his son with an expression of wonder that never seemed to fade. Watching him with their baby, Beatrice thought about how different this was from what she had experienced with Daniel. She thought about how lucky James was to have a father who would teach him about kindness and respect and treating others with dignity. The years passed with the steady rhythm of ranch life. James grew from a baby to a toddler to a little boy who followed his father everywhere and loved to help his mother in the garden. In 1882, Beatrice gave birth to a daughter, Emma, who had her mother's dark hair and determination. 2 years later came another son, Thomas, who was quiet and thoughtful and loved animals. Fletcher expanded the ranch slowly and carefully, never taking on more debt than they could handle, always planning for the future. By 1885, they had a proper herd, enough to provide steady income, and Fletcher had hired a couple of ranch hands to help with the work. Beatrice still helped with the ranch tasks, but also took on sewing work for extra money, discovering she had a talent for dressmaking. Their home grew along with their family. Fletcher added rooms to the cabin, proper bedrooms for the children, a larger kitchen for Beatrice. He built her a new barn for the chickens and goats she had acquired. He planted an orchard with apple and pear trees that would take years to bear fruit, but would be there for their children's children. Life was not always easy. There were years when the cattle prices dropped and money was tight. There was the summer of 1883 when drought threatened their creek and they had to haul water from town. There was the winter of 1884 when all three children got influenza at once and Beatrice and Fletcher spent terrified days nursing them back to health. But through everything, they had each other. When Beatrice was exhausted from caring for sick children, Fletcher would hold her and tell her she was doing wonderfully. When Fletcher worried about money and cattle and whether they would make it through another year, Beatrice would remind him of how far they had come and how strong they were together. Sometimes, usually late at night when the children were asleep and they sat together on their porch, Beatrice would think about that day in the street in Wasco. She would remember kneeling in the mud, feeling like her life was over, convinced she would never escape. And then she would look at Fletcher beside her, at the home they had built and the family they had created, and she was overwhelmed with gratitude for the cowboy who had been brave enough to step in when no one else would. "What are you thinking about?" Fletcher would ask, seeing the expression on her face. "About how you saved me," she would say, and he would shake his head, taking her hand in his. "No, Beatrice, you saved yourself. I just gave you the chance to do it. You are the one who had the courage to leave, to fight for your freedom, to build a new life. I just got lucky enough to be there when you needed someone. We saved each other then," she would compromise, and he would kiss her softly and agree. By 1890, over a decade after that terrible day in Wasco, Beatrice and Fletcher Logan had built a life that exceeded anything Beatrice had dreamed possible. Their ranch was successful, their children healthy and happy, their love deeper and stronger than ever. They had become respected members of their community, known for their hard work and integrity and kindness to others. James, now 10, was already talking about being a rancher like his father. Emma, at 8, had her mother's talent for growing things and spent hours in the garden. Thomas, at 6, loved reading and was forever asking his parents to teach him new things. Beatrice sometimes worked with women in Wasco who were in situations similar to what she had faced, offering them support and resources, connecting them with lawyers and safe places to stay. She never forgot what it was like to feel trapped and alone, and she was determined to help others find their own path to freedom. Fletcher had become a mentor to young ranch hands, teaching them not just about cattle and horses, but about treating people right and working hard and keeping your word. Several of the men who worked for him had gone on to start their own small ranches, and Fletcher was proud to have helped them get started. On their 12th wedding anniversary, Fletcher gave Beatrice a gift, a beautiful hand-carved wooden sign that read, "Logan Ranch founded 1878. He hung it over the gate at the entrance to their property. "So, everyone knows this is ours," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they stood looking at the sign. "Built by us, together, from nothing." "Not from nothing," Beatrice corrected softly. "From love, from respect, from two people who believed they could create something better." "From a woman who refused to stay broken," Fletcher added, "and from a cowboy who was lucky enough to see her strength." They stood there together as the sun set over their land, their children playing in the yard behind them, their whole life spread out in all directions. Beatrice leaned back against Fletcher's chest and felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She thought about the girl she had been at 19, marrying Daniel Harper with such hope and naivete. She thought about the woman she had been at 21, kneeling in the mud and believing her life was over. And she thought about the woman she was now at 33, standing on her own land with her husband's arms around her and her children's laughter in her ears. The journey from that street in Wasco to this moment had been hard and painful and terrifying, but every step had been worth it. Every moment of fear, every battle fought, every tear shed, all of it had led her here to this perfect life, with this perfect man and this beautiful family they had created together. "I love you," she said, turning in Fletcher's arms to look up at his face. "I love you too," he replied, and kissed her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day and every day since. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that. Forever, Beatrice. You and me, forever. Forever, she agreed, and in that moment, standing in the golden light of evening, with the man who had helped her gather her things from the mud and carried her away to somewhere safe, Beatrice Harper Logan knew that she had finally found her home. Not just a place, but a feeling, a person, a life built on love and respect and partnership. She had been rescued, yes, but more importantly, she had rescued herself. She had found the strength to leave, the courage to fight, and the wisdom to choose love when it was finally offered freely. And now she stood in the fullness of a life well lived, grateful for every moment that had brought her here. The children called them to dinner, and Fletcher took her hand as they walked back to the house together. Inside, the lamps were lit against the gathering darkness, and the table was set for 5. It was a simple scene, ordinary in every way, but to Beatrice it was extraordinary. This was what she had fought for, the right to live without fear, to be loved without conditions, to build a family based on kindness rather than control. As they sat down to eat, James chattering about something that happened with the horses, Emma showing off a flower she had picked, Thomas asking Fletcher to explain how stars worked, Beatrice looked around the table and felt her heart swell with joy. This was her family, her real family, built not on legal obligation, but on love and choice. After dinner, Fletcher helped clean up while the children did their evening chores. When everything was tidy and the children were getting ready for bed, Beatrice stepped out onto the porch for a moment of quiet. The night was clear and cool, stars brilliant overhead, the distant mountains dark shapes against the sky. She heard Fletcher's footsteps behind her and felt him place a blanket around her shoulders. "Cold?" he asked. "Just a little, but it is so beautiful I did not want to go inside yet." He stood beside her, both of them looking out at the land they had worked so hard to build. "Do you ever regret it?" Fletcher asked quietly. "The scandal, the divorce, all the hard times we went through?" Beatrice considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "I regret marrying Daniel in the first place. I regret not seeing what he was sooner. But leaving him, fighting for my freedom, building this life with you, I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every difficult moment led me here, to you, to this. How could I regret that?" Fletcher pulled her close, and they stood together in comfortable silence. Inside the house, they could hear the children settling down, Emma singing softly to herself, Thomas asking one more question before sleep. These sounds, these ordinary beautiful sounds of family life, were everything Beatrice had ever wanted. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me, for helping me, for loving me, for giving me the chance to become who I was meant to be." Fletcher turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Beatrice, you gave me just as much. Before I met you, I was just drifting from job to job, town to town, with no real purpose. You gave me something to build toward, something to protect and cherish. You made me want to be better, do better. We gave each other these lives." She stood on tiptoe to kiss him, this man who had changed everything, and felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt on their wedding day. Some kinds of love, she thought, never faded. They just grew deeper and richer with time. The years continued to roll forward with their predictable rhythms and unexpected joys. The children grew taller and more capable. James, at 15 in 1895, was becoming a skilled rancher in his own right, working alongside his father with pride. Emma, at 13, had discovered a love of drawing and filled sketchbooks with pictures of the ranch, the animals, the mountains. Thomas, at 11, was reading everything he could get his hands on and talking about maybe becoming a teacher someday. Fletcher's hair was starting to show silver at the temples, and Beatrice found she loved him even more with those marks of time. They were evidence of years lived together, of challenges overcome, of a partnership that had weathered every storm. In 1896, the town of Wasco decided to celebrate its 20th anniversary with a community gathering. Beatrice and Fletcher attended with their children, and it was strange to walk those familiar streets with such different feelings. The last time Beatrice had been here, she was a frightened woman trying to escape an abusive marriage. Now she was a successful ranch owner, a mother, a woman who had helped other women find their own freedom. They walked past the spot where it had all happened, that piece of street that had changed both their lives. It was just ordinary dirt road now, with nothing to mark what had occurred there nearly 2 decades ago. "This is where you met?" Emma asked, curious. Her parents had told her the story, carefully edited for her young ears, about how her father had helped her mother when she needed it most. "This is where I helped your mother gather some things that had been dropped," Fletcher said carefully, "and where I realized I had met someone very special." "This is where your father showed me what true kindness looked like," Beatrice added, "and where my new life began." James, old enough to understand more of the real story, looked at his parents with newfound respect. "You were very brave, Mama," he said seriously. "Both of you were." "We did what we had to do," Beatrice said. "Sometimes life puts you in situations where you have to choose between being safe and being free. Your father helped me understand that I could be both." They continued through the festival, running into old friends and making new ones. Mrs. Chen was there, now quite elderly, but still sharp as ever. She hugged Beatrice tightly and declared that her children were beautiful, and her life was exactly what she deserved. Sheriff Coleman, retired now but still respected, shook Fletcher's hand and told him he had done right by Beatrice all those years ago. "Not every man has the courage to stand up when something wrong is happening," he said. "You did, and look at the good that came from it." As the sun set on the festival, casting long golden shadows across the street, Fletcher pulled Beatrice aside and kissed her forehead. "Happy?" he asked, as he so often did. "Always," she answered, as she always did. "With you, Fletcher, I am always happy." They gathered their children and headed home to the ranch, the wagon rattling over familiar roads, the mountains purple in the distance, stars beginning to emerge overhead. Thomas fell asleep against Beatrice's shoulder, and Emma leaned against Fletcher while James sat up front driving the horses with careful concentration. This, Beatrice thought, was what success looked like. Not wealth or status or power, though they had achieved a comfortable life through hard work. Success was sitting in a wagon with your family, heading home to the place you had built together, knowing you were loved and valued and respected. Success was having the freedom to make choices and the courage to act on them. Success was finding someone who treated you as an equal partner rather than property. When they arrived home, Fletcher carried Thomas inside while the older children helped settle the horses. Beatrice stood for a moment in the yard, looking at their house with its added rooms and improvements, at the barn Fletcher had built with his own hands, at the garden she had nurtured for almost 2 decades. Every inch of this place represented their efforts, their dreams made real through determination and love. Fletcher came back out and stood beside her. "What are you thinking about?" "About how far we have come, about that scared woman in the mud and that kind cowboy who helped her, about everything that had to happen to bring us to this moment." "Regrets?" "Not a single one. Well, except maybe that I did not meet you first, before Daniel. Think of all the extra years we could have had together." Fletcher pulled her close. "We have the years we have, and I treasure every one of them. Besides, you needed to go through what you went through to become the woman you are. I do not know if the girl you were at 19 would have been ready for what we built together. You needed to find your strength, and unfortunately, that came through hardship." Beatrice considered this. He was probably right. She had been so young and sheltered when she married Daniel, so eager to please and so afraid of conflict. It had taken Daniel's cruelty to forge her into someone strong enough to leave, brave enough to start over, confident enough to build a life on her own terms. "Then I am grateful for the journey," she said, "even the hard parts, because they brought me here, to you, to this life." They went inside together, checking on the children, banking the fire, preparing the house for sleep. It was all so wonderfully ordinary, these nightly rituals of family life, and Beatrice never took them for granted. She remembered too well what it was like to dread the night, to lie awake wondering what mood Daniel would be in, whether he would drink too much, whether he would be angry or cruel. Now she lay down beside Fletcher in their comfortable bed, his arm around her, feeling completely safe. This was what marriage should be, she thought. Partnership, comfort, mutual respect, and love that deepened rather than diminished over time. "Fletcher," she whispered into the darkness. "Yes? Thank you for carrying me away to somewhere safe. Not just that day in Wasco, but every day since. You have given me the safest place I have ever known." He kissed her temple softly. "You have given me the same, Beatrice, a home, a family, a purpose, everything I have ever wanted. We carried each other to safety, love. That is what partners do." She fell asleep smiling, secure in his arms, dreaming of tomorrows that stretched out endlessly ahead of them, full of promise and possibility. The years marched on, bringing the inevitable changes of time. In 1900, James married a sweet girl named Sarah from a neighboring ranch, and they built a small house on the Logan property to start their own family. Emma, at 18, shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to go to San Francisco to study art. Fletcher and Beatrice, despite their worries about their daughter in the big city, supported her dreams and helped her find a reputable school and safe boarding house. Thomas, true to his childhood interests, became a teacher in Wasco, working with children and discovering he had a gift for making learning exciting. He married in 1902 a young woman named Margaret who taught alongside him. By 1905, Beatrice and Fletcher were grandparents 4 times over, with James and Sarah providing them with 3 grandchildren and Thomas and Margaret adding 1 more to the family. The ranch house, expanded multiple times over the years, was often full of children and laughter and chaos. Fletcher, now in his early 50s, still worked the ranch, though he left more of the physical labor to James and the hired hands. Beatrice, nearing 50 herself, had become something of a matriarch in the community. Known for her wisdom and kindness and willingness to help others, she served on committees for the church and school, helped new settlers get established, and continued her quiet work helping women escape difficult situations. One afternoon in the summer of 1905, a young woman appeared at their door. She was perhaps 22, with a black eye and a terrified expression, leading Beatrice to immediately know why she had come. Word had spread over the years about Beatrice's history and her willingness to help. "Mrs. Logan," the woman said hesitantly, "my name is Catherine. Someone in town said that you could. Come inside," Beatrice said gently, taking her arm. "You are safe here. Let me get you something to drink, and you can tell me what happened." Over tea and sandwiches, Catherine told her story. It was achingly familiar. A husband who drank, who hit, who controlled every aspect of her life. She had finally worked up the courage to leave, but had nowhere to go and no money. Beatrice listened with the patience of someone who had heard this story before, because she had lived it herself. When Catherine finished, Beatrice reached across the table and took her hand. "You are very brave to leave. I know it does not feel that way right now, but it is the hardest and bravest thing you will ever do. I am going to help you, just like people helped me when I was in your situation." She arranged for Catherine to stay with Mrs. Chen, who still ran her boarding house, though she was now well into her 80s. She connected Catherine with lawyers and women who could offer work. She and Fletcher quietly provided money for legal fees. Fletcher never questioned why Beatrice got involved in these situations. He understood that she was paying forward the kindness that had been shown to her, that she needed to help others find the safety and freedom she had found. "You have a good heart," he told her one evening after Catherine had been successfully established in a new life, her abusive husband no longer a threat. "You turn your pain into purpose. That is a rare gift." "I learned from you," Beatrice said. "You saw someone suffering, and you stepped in when no one else would. You showed me what real courage and kindness look like. I am just trying to live up to that example." Their life together continued its gentle arc, each year bringing its own joys and challenges. There were losses too, inevitable with time. Mrs. Chen passed away in 1907 at the age of 92, and both Beatrice and Fletcher mourned the woman who had been such an important part of their story. Sheriff Coleman followed a year later, his funeral attended by seemingly the entire county, all of them there to honor a man who had stood for justice even when it was difficult. But there were celebrations too. Emma returned from San Francisco in 1908 with a portfolio of beautiful artwork and stories about galleries showing her work. She had become a real artist, supporting herself through commissions and sales. She married a musician named David in 1909, and they made their home in San Francisco, but visited the ranch often. By 1910, Fletcher and Beatrice had been married for 32 years. They sat on their porch one evening in late summer, watching their grandchildren play in the yard while James and Sarah supervised. Thomas and Margaret were visiting with their children, and Emma and David had come from the city for a few weeks. The house was full and loud and wonderful. 32 years, Fletcher mused, his arm around Beatrice's shoulders. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I was carrying you to Mrs. Chen's boarding house. Other times, it feels like we have been together forever. Both are true, Beatrice said. The years have gone so fast, but we have lived so much in them. 3 children, 7 grandchildren, a successful ranch, a life full of love and purpose. We have been very fortunate. Fortunate and hardworking, and stubborn enough not to give up when things got difficult, Fletcher added. We built this, Beatrice, together, every bit of it. She leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the sun paint the mountains gold and orange. She was nearing 60 now, her hair showing silver, her hands showing the work of decades. Fletcher was 58, his face weathered by sun and wind, his body still strong, but showing the inevitable effects of time. They were not young anymore, but they were together, and that was all that mattered. Do you remember what you said to me that first day? Beatrice asked. When you were gathering my things from the mud. Fletcher thought for a moment. I said a lot of things that day. You said that I should be treated with respect, that my possessions mattered because I mattered. No one had ever said anything like that to me before. Daniel certainly never made me feel like I mattered, but you did, right from the start. Because you did matter, you do matter, you always will. She turned to kiss him, this man who had saved her and loved her and built a life with her. I love you, Fletcher Logan. Thank you for every day, every moment, every year of this beautiful life we have created. I love you too, Beatrice, forever and always. As the evening deepened and the family eventually came inside for dinner, Beatrice felt a profound sense of contentment. This was the happily ever after she had never dared hope for when she was kneeling in that mud 33 years ago. This was the reward for having the courage to leave, for believing she deserved better, for accepting the help of a kind cowboy who saw her worth when she could barely see it herself. Their story had started in mud and tears and humiliation, but it had transformed into something beautiful, a partnership built on mutual respect, a family rooted in love, a legacy of kindness passed down to children and grandchildren. And it was far from over. They still had years ahead of them, years to watch their grandchildren grow, to celebrate more milestones, to simply sit together on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. Beatrice Harper Logan had been rescued from the mud, but more importantly, she had rescued herself. And in doing so, she had found not just safety, but home, not just survival, but joy, not just freedom from cruelty, but freedom to love and be loved in return. That, she thought, as she watched Fletcher laugh at something James said, as she listened to her grandchildren's happy voices, as she sat in the home they had built together over decades of partnership and effort, was the real miracle. Not the dramatic rescue in the street, though that had been important. The real miracle was what came after. 2 people choosing each other every single day, building something lasting and true, creating a life that honored the courage it took to start over. And as the stars emerged overhead and the lamplight glowed warm from the windows of their home, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that every difficult step of her journey had been worth it, because all those steps, through mud and fear and pain and growth, had led her here, to love, to family, to a life well lived, to home.